Yeah,
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of ICT's Counter-Terrorism. Today, I'm Itai Hanman, and I am very happy to be here on our Zoomcast as we continue with our series of interviews and podcasts with, as mentioned many of times, different experts from around the world in different capacities, academics, practitioners, scholars, everyone in between, as we continue to explore how coronavirus has affected every different industry and how it has affected in return national security. As we are counterterrorism today, still examining terror and counter-terror strategy. And coronavirus has opened the door to different aspects of life to have to change on the fly. Things had to evolve, and no less so did counterterrorism. And everything can be related in some way to national security, and coronavirus has bent to its will the people and societies around the world, and thus we are exploring how it has affected national security, specifically here in Israel and around the globe. Today, I am extremely honored to have with me on the Zoomcast is former Ambassador Daniel Carmon. He was the former ambassador to India from Israel, to India and Sri Lanka, from Israel, and completed his term in September of 2018, a 4-year stint from 2014. Ambassador Carmon, how are you doing today?
I'm fine. Thank you very much. And I'm very glad to be here with you, Itai, and with your spectators.
I really appreciate you taking the time. I know that you have a busy schedule and that you have taken it to join us here, and we appreciate it. Let me start off by asking you a little bit about the history of Israel-India relations and sort of where they stand now since you were the ambassador.
Yeah, I'll be glad to do that. And I have to say that you cannot look, and appreciate the relations between India and Israel, on which we hear quite often in the news and in the media, without going back 30, 40, and I'm not talking about thousands of years, because there is a relationship between the Jewish people and the Indian people, so to speak, for thousands of years. But let us go back the foreseeable 30, 35 years ago. You cannot look at today's relationship without understanding the process that we have all seen, that we have witnessed a real miracle from, let's say, the 70s, the 80s, where the world was a different world. The world stage was dominated by a bipolar regime, I would say, with a Cold War, with a very strong manifestation of the non-aligned movement within the international arena. And India was one of the leaders of the non-aligned movement, which was very much influenced by the Arab world, with a policy towards the Middle East that would say that there is a sort of a zero-sum game, saying that those who have good relations with Israel cannot have good relations with the emerging world. You could see it at the United Nations, you could see it in the Arab boycott, you could see it in so many different areas of international economics and trade and politics. But those things are gone now. And the same India, which looked at Israel politically, because of political inhibitions, looked at Israel as if Israel was on the other side. Just to give you a little example, on an Indian passport, there was a saying that the passport is not valid for traveling to Israel until 30, 35 years ago. This was the starting point of a process that I have to say I was very, very proud to continue this process that started in 1992 when India and Israel formalized relations. We used to have a consulate in Mumbai since the early 50s, but it was without having diplomatic relations. Israel had a consulate for the sake of Aliyah, but there were no diplomatic relations until 1992. There was mutual recognitions, but no diplomatic relations. And since 1992, there is an ongoing process, which as I said, I'm very glad and proud to have been part of strengthening relations from that position that I described before in the 80s, 70s, and until 92, and until now, where India and Israel have declared themselves in 2017 as strategic partners. In the joint statement that accompanied, that ended the visit by Prime Minister Modi to Israel in 3 years ago, exactly 3 years ago, in the 4th to 6th of July 2017.
And that was a very proud moment for the state of Israel. I'm sure for all the hard work that went in from your end, as well as a proud moment for the Indian people and their relations held here in Israel. I mentioned something that was very important there, which was the strategic relationship between the two countries. And that was something that I really wanted to ask you about specifically, because it seems that if you look at the history of the two countries, you look at the history of the people, you also said there is a deep connection between the Jewish people and the Indian people that goes back thousands of years. It almost seemed that India and Israel would be a natural fit, a natural ally for one another, to help one another. It also screams polar opposites, if you will, when there's 1.2 to 3 billion people in the country of India. There's just over 8 million people in the country of Israel. There are
but
cities.
Together we are 1.3.
Exactly, correct. And but very interestingly, there are cities that have near double the population of Israel just in one city in India. So where do relations currently stand, and what does that mean exactly, strategic relationship?
Let me refer to the first opening statement and remarks that you gave talking about national security, and if I may add, the word national resilience. We tend usually to look at the strategic relationship as if they're only connected to security and to defense. And this part definitely exists in the relationship between India and Israel. There is a large chunk of the relations that is dedicated and has always been dedicated to defense and security, even in the first years of the process that I described. That when you look today at the objectives of a country, when a government, when a people thinks about sustainable development, about resilience, about national security interests, it's not only the army or the defense on the rockets or the technology, the military technology, but also the possibility, and in India it's a very strong objective of the government, the possibility to feed the country, feed the people, have technology, technology in water management, etc. And when those two governments, the two prime ministers, have decided in 2017 to elevate the relationship from whatever, friendship or something, to strategic partnership, they meant the defense relationship, they meant the agriculture relationship, they meant relationship in the field of water management and other areas that are civilian areas, but they do form and strengthen and accumulate into something that for each country, it's in the national security and resilience and development perspective, but when they combine, even though there is a big difference, as you said, in the sizes, in the number of citizens, and I would say also there is a difference in the development status of each of those two countries. But still, when they meet, when they combine, when they sit around the same table, there is a lot to be said on both sides, on both sides. And I have to say that when I was in India, there is one word that I never accepted from anyone. It doesn't matter if it was government people or local state governments or any other interlocutors that I had. The world is not based on assistance, but on cooperation. And I meant it. And so do my colleagues. We are talking about cooperation. Each side adds and contributes to the joint table its relative strength and experience and know-how in different fields. And those fields together form this wonderful relationship. And I'm even saying the wonderful journey that those two countries are going through in the past 28 years.
It's a very wonderful blossoming relationship. And you mentioned a few areas of expertise that I know Israel has been involved in, export to India, water management, agriculture, and you can look specifically at kibbutz in southern Israel with its drip irrigation systems and how that has transformed agriculture in especially desert-like conditions. And I know that that was a very big deal when it was brought to India in an export capacity. Maybe you can let our audience know some of the wonderful things that the great country of India has brought to the table in the spirit of cooperation, as you just mentioned.
I'll take your example and sort of elaborate on it. Agricultural cooperation between India and Israel. And by the way, we have, through a branch of the foreign ministry in Israel, a branch called Mashav, we have our biggest agricultural project outside Israel is in India, in which we have, together with the Indian government in Delhi and together with the local government in few states, 6 or 7 out of the 28 states of India, planning to, of course, expand it even further, what we call centers of excellence. Centers of excellence are farms, agricultural farms, in which we, together with the Indian experts, we build farms where we sort of share capacity building, technologies, irrigation, drip irrigation, and other agricultural technologies in a way that, just as an example, an Israeli minister visited one of those farms and he said, I feel like I'm in Bet Alpha now. I don't feel that I'm in India. Same as the Israeli president or the Israeli prime minister who visited those farms. And they heard from the farmers, from the Indian farmers, what this new way of looking at agriculture means from them in the point of view of income, in bettering the food production and bettering their lives. The Indian side is more than a partner in this project, so that each, as I said before, each side brings its own capacity and experience. When we go and have a center of excellence in the field of mangoes, Israel has developed wonderful mango species, and I think we're talking about 5 or 6 very good, very developed and very tasty mangoes. But India comes with hundreds of years of experience in the field of growing mangoes. We have a lot to learn from them. We don't come and say, okay, we have with our 5 species of mangoes, we know everything. Now listen to me, I'll teach you this or that. Not at all. We come and we learn You have mentioned the issue of drip irrigation. You talked about one company in the south, and I think I know who you're talking about, probably Netafim. But there are two more companies in India, two more Israeli companies in India. One very big one a little smaller one, but three very successful companies in which they bring the technology, in which one of them at least has a few production plants in India, in which they produce the systems. They might bring the 5% of technology from Israel, but the production is in India. And they are also involved in huge projects in this huge country of India. And again, this is a commercial endeavor. It's not a development endeavor like I described before in this project of centers of excellence, but it's something that is done by both sides. And I think both sides are very proud about this old and new relationship or partnership or journey, as I like to call it.
That's very interesting, and it's a wonderful journey, and you watch and follow that journey. I think something that is important that audiences understand is the diplomatic work that a ambassador has to do, if you will, walk even the tightrope of diplomacy. Israel has a very interesting relationship with China. And when you look at the history of India and China, it is not a very, I guess, happy relationship. You can compare it to Israel and its neighbors a little bit in our neighborhood here in the Middle East. When you think of the sheer size and power of those two countries, a war between them is a horrible scenario for the globe, not just for the subcontinent. But when you are a diplomat and Israel has very good relations with China, is having very wonderful relations with India, what is that tightrope you have to walk to make sure to not offend the Indian representatives by special projects that get done with the Chinese, and I guess what would have to be the diplomatic tightrope that the ambassador to China has to walk when special projects are announced, arms sales, for example, defense contracts, strategic relationship between India and Israel, that has to affect relations on another end. So what type of a tightrope, what type of diplomatic work does an ambassador have to do to try to make sure that nothing gets out of hand?
Well, I'm not going to analyze India, China, or maybe other countries related to that region. We have enough tzures and trouble in our own region. But one has to look at the relations. One particular point of Indian-Chinese relation, which is very much based on a positive side of economics and investment between those two countries. So when we come and talk about this part of the relations, and you rightly, very rightly so said that the relations between Israel and both countries are very strong, but they're very different in nature. Different and not different. As a former head of Mashav, I can tell you that we had an extensive Mashav work in China, but both countries, both China and India, are countries that are not described in the international arena as ODA countries, which is official development assistance countries, because the governments have budgets that they could cover the costs of development activities, which usually other countries like in Africa or some in Latin America would not. But still we have maintained a very good cooperation in various fields with both countries. And during 4 years, I have to say, of course, you always follow what's going on, and we have to follow what's going on between, for me, India or Sri Lanka and the neighborhood. But I didn't see one bit of a problematic. I cannot deny what you say. We should be very alert, but I have not seen any problem between us and those two countries as related to the relations with the other. We have to be careful. We have to be alert. We have to understand the parameters of the relations with each one, and there are different relations for sure. Because in a relation you have the economic side, you have the cooperation side, you have the political side, and with each partner, you know more or less where we stand. Here or there, as an ambassador, of course, I was not dealing only with agriculture or water or mangoes, but it was an important part of my job, but it wasn't the only one. And the ambassador in China does not deal only with economics when he talks with the government or local governments or the people or whatever. So yes, there might be a need to be very alert, but I never experienced any problematics in this field. But things are very open. We don't deny anything and we don't hide anything in our relations with both countries, which are very good with both countries.
And it's very important to be able to maintain that relationship with both countries, as they're both powers in the world and powers to come in the world. The two largest populations on the planet, massive land mass, and in one of the most strategic locations on the planet. So another very interesting thing in the strategic relationship between Israel and India is the field of defense. We are seeing a lot of arms sales from Israel to India in large numbers, some of the biggest contracts that the Israeli government or Israel defense industries have ever seen in one time or in general terms. Very interesting to see also the specific equipment that they are expressing interest in and that they are trying to purchase. It shows and goes towards the technological advancements that the Israeli defense industries are able to produce and what they're worth on the world stage. It's very interesting to see. So Israel is clearly on the world stage considered one of the leading experts when it comes to national security, defense policy, counter-terrorism, and when it comes to manufacturing and engineering defense platforms and operations. Where do you see the relationship between Israel and India continuing forward, with Israel able to continue to provide, for example, counterterrorism expertise to a country that it has suffered terrorism in the past, that has a problem on the Kashmir area where terrorism does take place there, and India is not immune to terrorism unlike anyone else in the world. So how do you see the relationship being built on that specific industry further? Are the ties going to be deepened?
First, I'm very glad to see that you're very well informed on the relations on this side. I made a point, and I will stick to it. I made a point not going into the details, too much into the details of specifics. But I do acknowledge, and you did so also, that the defense side of our relations has always been very important. I would even add that we were one of the first countries to engage in one of the projects of the Indian government a few years ago, which is called Make in India, meaning that foreign countries foreign companies or foreign governments through companies, as it is in our case, can engage in India with Indian partners in a way that they can produce equipment or systems that were developed in the original country and do it in production lines in India. And I specifically, um, this is common, it was common knowledge in India and still is, I specifically had the honor and pride to participate in 3 inaugurations of 3 plants throughout India, in which Israeli systems would be produced in Indian territory with Indian manpower and Indian partners of Israeli companies in the field of defense. In the same way that production lines exist or plants exist in the field of agriculture. The scope is much higher, and the magnitude of the activity is also quite extensive. And this is a relationship that engages and joins an Indian policy which embetters the Indian economy. So I will not go into sizes, because at the end of the day, we're Israel and we're a bit small compared to India. But the relationship is very important for both sides, and it has a defense angle, and it also has an economic angle in which we are joining an Indian policy which is intended to make India more industrialized than it is today. In our small way, but it is very much appreciated both in the field of agriculture and in the field of defense. Now, I'd like to pinpoint two issues that might be interesting also. A few months before I arrived to India, India and Israel signed a landmark, I would call it landmark agreement on homeland security and anti-terrorism. This agreement is evolving throughout the years and has produced many cooperations between Israel, India, Israeli companies, Indian companies, and or local governments. Like in anything that has to do with cooperation or business or values like fighting terrorism, there is a lot still to be done. I will not go in the details, but we will always want to do more, both sides. But I did want to put a check mark on this landmark agreement, like a few other agreements that we have been signing in other areas too. One thing that we would like to do, which is not definitely related specifically to defense, but it is connected to trade, which is a big effort on both sides. But I can tell you as an ambassador, I really had it as one of my top priorities, is to advance in the process of a free trade agreement between India and Israel. India, throughout the years, has had its hiccups to sign free trade agreements with other countries because of the big, huge, strong local industry, which is not very happy to sign free trade agreement because they would fear that they would be, as an industry, that they would sort of lose from such agreements. But if you look at the overall policy of India to look around itself and look for international partners, I think that this sort of fluctuation of policies to sign or not to sign free trade agreement tends, I think, would tend towards looking for partners. And we feel that Israel is a great partner to sign free trade agreements, because India and Israel could benefit very much from this. And I hope, if you ask me where do those relations take us, if a free trade agreement is signed, and we have had already 9 or 10 rounds of negotiations. If a free trade agreement is signed between both countries, it will take the relations a huge step forward, and it will involve not only governments, but also big business or small business in all the necessary and relevant fields.
As we look to the future and what the potential openings are to deepening the relationship between the two nations, a free trade agreement is right up there and hugely important. I can just attest to what the North American Free Trade Agreement did for Mexico and Canada specifically, being Canadian and seeing how the economic trade-off of that deal specifically when it was born and what it did to North America as a whole was something incredible. So I could only imagine what that would do for relations between Israel and India being really a marketplace of, like we said, 1.3 billion people. That is no small fry and nothing to scoff at. Another field that could be potentially explored, and maybe the opening is now, during coronavirus, it has obviously put Israel back onto the world stage in a very interesting manner. Israel is looked at as a leading expert in medical research, in medicine technologies, etc., and thus has propelled Israel to the front of the line in trying to develop a vaccine, to try to develop a cure, to try to develop managing tools for the coronavirus. So during this pandemic, has there, in your opinion, been an opportunity, an opening of some sort that Israel could find a way to help its friend and ally India in the fight against corona? And how can the deepening of the relationship be attributed to the biomedical field?
So I'll do what I did when I was ambassador to India, and I will erase the word help. Here again, we have cooperation. Some people might be surprised, but India has a very advanced industry and scientists in the medical field, as well as in the research and the area of aerospace, and in the area of science and technology and high-tech. Number of startups in India is a huge, huge number, in the thousands. So there is another language that we can speak together between India and Israel. And talking about the coronavirus era, I have to say that India, contrary to a policy, and because of the good relations between Israel and India, in very critical times, they have freed, they have let some medicine to be flown to Israel in a very critical time that we had in the first wave of the coronavirus crisis, and other, I would say, products were sent to Israel contrary to a decree not that prohibited export out of India. And this, I would say, has to do with the very strong relationship that we have developed throughout the years, and something that is very important in the relations, which is a very personal friendship between the two prime ministers. Our president was not involved specifically in the coronavirus, but the president also throughout the years has developed this kind of a friendship. So it's not only Israel that comes to help its friend, but it's again a meeting of the minds and a meeting of the experience and of the scientists. And there is few areas that the two prime ministers have decided in a few conversations that they have had in the last few weeks to contribute to themselves, but also to contribute to the world, which is a vision that accompanies them in their dialogue and the dialogue between the countries for a long time now. How can we benefit together, and how can we also help other participants in the world stage to benefit from our joint work. And the coronavirus crisis is definitely a stage to do so. I know that there were a few dozens of areas that are being explored by scientists and chief scientists on the technological side, including one particular method that is being checked, of doing very, very quick testing of people or patients, a testing that would take only few seconds, and this has been developed as we now speak. But there are other areas in which the relationship that we have formed during the years have also passed the test, I would say, during this crisis, when one of the characteristics of the crisis is that countries were going within themselves and within their borders, making all sorts of decisions within their borders. Here you see something that is cross-border between two friends, two strategic allies, India and Israel. You can see it with other countries too, but it's very interesting to see how this has evolved between India and Israel too. And I'm so glad when I hear every time there is something new and interesting that is a new opportunity between those two countries.
Exactly where we should hopefully end our conversation is just looking into the future slightly. And I wanted to just ask you before we let you go is to look into the future on two levels. One, where do you think the relationship will go, or what is going to be the main driver of that relationship into the future? Is it going to be defense? Is it agriculture? Is it medicine? High-tech industry? What do you think will be the main driver of the relationship in the future? Where they sort of will be in the future? And then how has the coronavirus forced the position of an ambassador to adapt or evolve? What would you say has changed in the nature of that type of work and thus its relationship with its host country?
Maybe the fact that an ambassador has to be speaking with his audiences more through Zoom like we do now. I guess that my successor is also, but this is technical. And I think that when the dust settles down and some things will have to change, but I'm sure my successor and my successors will continue to travel throughout India, will continue to speak with the Indian government and with local governments, which are very, very important in India. And much of the activity is delegated by Delhi, but is done specifically in the various countries, various states of India. So I'm sure this will continue. The content of the relations, which is the first part of the question that you asked, would have to go, I'm sure that defense and security and anti-terrorism will continue to dominate and be a strong part of the relations, but by definition you will hear less about it, even though they are expanding. You will hear less about it because much is done by companies, even though they get the blessing of the state of Israel and the state of India. It's not something that is very much in the forefront, but this will continue. Some will continue by itself, by its own inertia, and it's very important. No doubts about the importance of this. And it has been there from 92, but even before 92. This will continue. But if we look at where other areas would continue, expand, and develop, I would look at 3, 4 particular areas. First of all, we have to continue, or they have. I'm an onlooker now, but I'm trying to contribute as much as I can from the outside. I would say the agricultural part. Let's look, when an Indian or any leader wakes up in the morning, especially in a country which is so huge, so big, with so many challenges ahead of him, what are his priorities? And he will say what his priorities are, but where can we, on our angle, be part of his endeavor? And I would say that agriculture, for the sake of Israel, India, and maybe other countries too, to develop this system that we have developed until now of centers of excellence. And I haven't mentioned it, but we have around 30 centers of excellence throughout 9 or 10 states in India. This would, I think, should be expanded. And if I'm not mistaken, if I heard right, they are going to expand it from centers of excellence into villages or regions of excellence, to take the Israeli experience and sort of bring it to India. Another very important area is the area of water. Water management, water conservation, water desalination, water storing, anything that has to do with water. And I'm now quoting from our leadership, telling the Indian leadership, you tell us what the issue is and we will find the solution. And I do believe, from my experience knowing the Israeli, especially the Israeli companies and the Israeli technology in the field of water, I'm sure with good management and political will, and political will exists because Israel is very much appreciated throughout India, we can bring the area of water to be as important, maybe, throughout the years, as important as defense is. And this will form a very strong bond between India and Israel. Other areas are not less important. Academia. Nowadays, 10% of the foreign students in Israel are Indians, believe it or not. Maybe in numbers it's not that big, but still 10% of foreign students.
That's
Academia.
significant.
It is.
10% is very significant. It's 10%. Not from one place, from one location. That is significant, especially when you think about that the majority of foreign students that come to Israel on a general level are usually have some affiliation to Israel, be it Jewish roots, family, etc. India is not known for massive Jewish populations, so the fact that 10% of foreign students here are from India is very significant.
It's very significant, I agree. Research, science, entrepreneurship, high-tech technology, all of those either through companies or through the scholars that you can see in Weizmann Institute or in the agriculture faculty in Rehovot, etc., is a very strong potential of the relation of what we call the growing partnership between India and Israel, and the, I would say, part which we really have to better our results trade. There is a lot to be desired in the area of trade. A lot has been done, but there is so much more to be done. And as I said, a free trade agreement or any other kind of solution that would open up the markets of a very small country with a very small economy like Israel into India, in areas, we are a niche economy, in areas in which our niche economy can be part of the Indian endeavor. I think it's very well known to our Indian friends and colleagues and partners, and I hope it will happen soon.
I hope so as well. I really do hope for continued deepening of relations between the two countries. As I said on the top of the show, Israel and India feel like they are natural allies. There is so much to learn from one another, to cooperate with one another, but there is such a history, that shared history, if you will, also shared contemporary history, specifically when you look at how India was born out of colonialism, British rule, British mandates. Israel came out of a British mandate, modern day Israel, that is. Other historical factors that are there, and then the industries that you mentioned that is so strategically important, natural allies. There's so much to be said there. This was a very interesting and enlightening conversation. For anyone that has joined us partway through, we've been joined on Counterterrorism today with former Ambassador Daniel Carmon, who was ambassador to India and Sri Lanka from July of 2014 until September of 2018, completing a 4-year term there. Ambassador Carmon, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. I was very glad to be here with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Shalom. Shalom.